Ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the first OCN Security Board. I'm aware that every person in this room has important responsibilities, so we'll skip all that protocol nonsense in the interest of time. So, to business. The main focus of this meeting is to figure out our course of action in this uncertain future. As you all know, recent discoveries placed us in a bad position. 3 of our 4 closest neighbors are hostile, and it is a high time for us to address the matter of our defense and security. You have been asked to devise strategies that we could use to improve our military situation. Let's listen to them. First, representative of Department of Naval Engineering and Logistics, Miss Frida Reiter. You have the floor. Thanks, Prime Minister. The department fully supports our current defensive efforts as laid out in the Phalanx Protocol. We, however, believe that with focused efforts from our nation, this protocol could be improved. One of the points there, which, mind you, we still haven't committed to, is creation of auxiliary defensive platforms around our inhabited planets in order to support defensive capabilities of our spaceports and, in turn, ensure the safety of our citizens. My division believes that it could be taken a step further. Instead of just minor platforms, with proper support from the government, we should be able to construct full-blown orbital fortresses. Not only that, if the nation is convinced about their usefulness, our concerted efforts would mean far greater efficiency of these fortifications. We could build them cheaper, make them more resilient, and install more firepower on them. Additionally, we presented our plans to the Bioshock division, and they believe that such focus on defensive mentality will surely increase the efficiency of our fleet during defensive operations. Alright, that's enough. Have you ever actually read a history book, Engineer Reiter? Static defenses didn't work for our ancestors back on Earth, and now you want to build them in space, where our enemies will have infinitely more ways to just go around them. General Branitzky, you disrespect your peers by speaking out of turn. I will not allow it to happen again, understood? Please continue, Miss Reiter. I was almost done anyway. Still, the General raised a good point. It really is easy to avoid stellar defenses. However, we thought around that, and we believe that our current technology will enable us to force the enemy to come to us, allowing us to control their advance. There, I'm done. Very well. General Branitzky, you have the floor now. Thank you, Prime Minister, and of course my apologies to you, Miss Reiter. Still, I believe that our military shouldn't be focused on defensive operations, but instead on offensive maneuvers. Together with my staff officers, I have prepared an addendum to the Phalanx Protocol, the Agema Doctrine, in which our fleet will focus its attention on high-speed hit-and-run tactics. With our industrial potential at our back, we would modify our ships for such operations, increasing their speed, maneuverability, and firepower. Instead of hiding behind our walls, we would strike at our foes wherever they are weak, constantly keeping their main force occupied but never truly engaging it, slowly bleeding them out in a series of smaller engagements. Bit by bit, we will destroy their industrial and military potential and keep them away from our walls at the same time. Surely it's a better solution than just inviting the enemy into our space. That remains to be seen, General. Would you like to add something else? Good, then it is Admiral Lynn's turn to present her ideas. Go ahead. Both those ideas I've just heard sound good, Prime Minister. They both have their advantages, but they also have the same weakness. They aren't too flexible, forcing our forces to act in a specific way with little chance for deviation. And I, as well as my captains, believe that the name of the space warfare is flexibility. So, instead, I propose a simpler solution. More resources for the Navy. It would allow us to build ships that could withstand more punishment and dish out more damage, something that is useful no matter if we are defending or attacking. Not to mention, it would surely increase the morale of our crews if they knew that the vessels they serve on are built to the highest possible standards. That's all from me, but I wonder what our government thinks about all this. Usually you have some sort of strategy hidden up your sleeve. If we do, then I have not been informed of it, Admiral. Most of us are scientists turned politicians, so we are not exactly up to speed on military matters. If anything, I believe the government would adopt the way of our ancestors. The Industrial War. Then we have all the better incentive to decide on one of our options, ladies and gentlemen. Industrial warfare costed our ancestors millions of lives in 20th century, and I can't even begin to think how high the casualties would be now. Couldn't agree more, Admiral. Still, one more question. What do we intend to do about our land forces? The topic is raised more and more often recently. Not much to say about it, truth be told. The Ilmarinen Foundation presented several ways of improving our ground forces, as well as preparing them for operations on other alien worlds. They secured several contracts on Curacao and are currently moving most of their assets there. And what is this Ilmarinen Foundation? Never heard of them before. They're a weapon manufacturing company. In theory, their CEO is some military industrialist from Yalcha, but in truth the company belongs to Demetrius Sinon. He laid out quite a lot of money to secure this contract, and before you ask, no, there is no need to worry. Sinon is a ruthless capitalist, true, but that makes him predictable. He's in for the profit, which makes him immune to all sorts of ideological nonsense, not to mention he will certainly be interested in increasing our influence. The safer and more widespread we are, the more money we'll make, simple as that. But now is not the time to discuss it, we're still not done. Now, regarding the Yadra encroachment. Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Second Chance. When we left humanity last time, OCN was just beginning its widespread militarization in order to prepare our people for possible future conflicts with our rivals to the north. And, by the way, I have no idea if calling directions in space like north or south is correct, so if anyone has a better alternative, I'd happily use it. Regardless, the first, most obvious rival of our nation is the Zrakan Union. For years, we believed that should it actually come to fighting, it would be against slaving despots of Yannari League. But, as it turned out, the sudden appearance of fanatically religious plantoids completely switched our priorities. Because, in truth, they seem to be even worse than the Yannari. At least our crocodile slavers are following some sort of logic. Their society is decadent, and so it needs slaves to properly function. But the Zrakan are enslaving other races as well, as we have seen with the mysterious Aramathi, but they also appear to be forcefully converting them to their religion, the so-called Way of Light. Now, perhaps Zrakan history is way different than ours, we can't tell because they don't want to talk to us except to preach, but all that religious fanaticism is very disconcerting for our people. After all, our ancestors who came from old Earth learned that religious wars were one of the worst, deadliest bloodbaths in history, so no wonder all that crusading vibe we get from the Zrakan is putting our government on edge. Our second possible enemies are, surprisingly, the Yadra, and actually I was completely wrong calling them that. Though their nation is called Kingdom of Yadra, the actual race that inhabits it is called Carthema. Still, we'll stick with calling them Yadra since it's easier and faster to pronounce. Anyway, you remember that planet Bera 2 with its psionic fish, or planets Fulus 3 and Fulus B that our government plans to colonize? Well, we can't do that anymore because Kingdom of Yadra began pushing into our territory by colonizing Zarmatan system, which enabled them to lay claims to those two star systems I just mentioned, robbing us of 3 valuable planets. Now, this will not stand, and as soon as our council heard about this encroachment, they immediately sent CSV developer to remedy that by building a frontier outpost. Basically, it's an official national starbase that our people can use to establish themselves in systems far away from home, and therefore expand our galactic influence by, well, simply being there and claiming as much galactic terrain as possible. A regular station wouldn't really matter that much, but the presence of our government official gives it enough credibility. And, of course, it's more than just a symbolic flag stuck into some planet or a star. The outpost can refuel and resupply our ships, and it can act as a staging ground for our operations. Now, there is only one issue. Because of Yadran claims, the closest star we could build this outpost at was Myrinius, that mysterious pink star that is home to several microscopic wormholes that lead to other dimensions. Let's hope our people won't mess with them too much. We have enough issues already without poking other planes of existence. And the most important issue of them all is of course help we have promised the Aramathi, which leads us to another thing. We have to prepare for war. And, as it happens, interstellar war is way more complicated than it initially seemed. During planetary warfare it was relatively easy to equip armies and lead them to combat, but in space we need so much more. Space stations, supply stations, transport ships, and finally warships that will ensure our armies can actually reach our enemy without being blown to pieces. And the problem here is that it is all extremely expensive. Even a single one of our corvettes costs more resources than outfitting an entire 1 million soldier army, and we potentially need dozens of them to compete with Zrakan fleet. And right now the issue is the sheer amount of various materials we need. It takes us about 3 months to gather enough resources for an Aquila class corvette, and then 2 more months for our shipyards to build it, and that is just way too slow. But we can't really do much about it. We're already deploying mining robots as fast as possible, and our people people are all mostly focused on improving our industry, so there's only one option left: put our politicians to work. Not in the mines and factories, mostly because they would be completely useless there, but to devise new laws in preparation for coming wars. We could implement some edicts that would temporarily increase our industrial capacity, but it would require considerable support from all political parties. Thing is, our government is not as influential as it once was. Colonization efforts, diplomacy and unification negotiations means that we are spread rather thin, and we need to somehow increase our standing among the population. And in this time, when you can't walk 10 meters without walking into some preaching warmonger, the best idea to do this is to perform stupid acts of hostile diplomacy, like, for example, officially denouncing our neighbors. We're already rivals with the Zrakan, but now OCN government decided to take it a step further and denounce the Yanari and the Yadra, and releasing official statements that these two nations are our rivals, same as the Zrakan Union. Now, while denouncing the slavers isn't too much of a deal, declaration against peaceful kingdom of Yadra raised some eyebrows, but as soon as the public learned about Yadran land grab policies, all doubters suddenly went quiet. If anyone is going to do any land grabbing around here, it's going to be us, not some feudal space dragons. And, as expected, as soon as they were done stamping their foot, the ratings of Innovation Party increased, showing just how quickly we have turned from optimistic explorers into warmongers. We're getting even closer to midnight now. But that was not the end of our diplomatic moves for a while. Shortly after we sent our messages, we received one back, but not from any of our neighbors, but from yet another spacefaring civilization, the Utkavongo Sovereign Stars, a seemingly peaceful democracy of fungoids that, according to their greetings, was absolutely fixated with the ideals of freedom and personal laws. But the greatest shocker was the fact that they looked exactly like our freshly uplifted friends, the Kithri, which caused a complete, uncontrollable uproar among our scientific community. But upon establishing official contact, the Utkavongo were just as bewildered by this revelation as we were, and soon they confirmed that, although they look the same, their biological composition is very different from Kithri one, due to both races evolving on different planets. So perhaps their mirror appearances are just a coincidence, but after everything we've seen in this galaxy so far, I think we deserve a right to remain skeptical. Still, for now we're going to leave this issue. Though the Sovereign Stars are friendly, we can't really establish any real relations with them, because we are separated by the Yadra, who seem to hate Utkavongo democracy just as much as they hate ours. Perhaps one day we'll solve this problem, but for now we'll just have to stick to long-distance communications. But I know that as soon as we establish real diplomatic relations with the Stars, their people and the Kithri will certainly have a lot to talk about. But for now, we're back to our militarization, as OCN has just figured out a way how to speed it up. Although we're not the most powerful or most widespread civilization in our sector, our slower, more logical approach to space exploration gave us more time to focus on analyzing all the data we gathered, and as such we are currently the most advanced nation, at least among those we have encountered so far. And although our scientific community wasn't too pleased with the idea, in the end OCN decided that if our technological advances can't build us an army, they can very well be used as a trading commodity. Soon, delegates from our nation approached ambassadors of the more friendly alien cultures and presented them a deal: our knowledge for their resources and or access to their industry. In some cases, like with the Alir, we even managed to negotiate a research deal and get a massive amount of resources in one go, but in others, like say with Miravandians, we just sold our tech without receiving any knowledge in return, since they don't really trust us all that much. Still, the sheer amount of raw materials we received from those deals made us realize just how far behind we are when it comes to actual expansion, giving us yet another reason to cut Zrakan down to size. Because for every day their nation is larger than ours, the disparity in power will grow larger and larger until one day we may not be able to put up any reasonable resistance. So, although selling our secrets might have some consequences in the long term, we're going to commit to it anyway, before someone decides just to take our technology by force. And once we're done, the build-up of our armed forces will finally begin, another step closer to midnight. The final deal has been signed, and as you can see at the top of the screen there, we ended up with absolute tons of resources to fuel our factories. All across our worlds, masons, shipwrights and triggers are rolling up their sleeves, but before we begin allocating these seemingly endless resource convoys to specific tasks, we still have one bit of diplomacy to make, as we received yet another message from unknown alien empire. This time it's an entity called Shalani Coalition, which is yet another democracy inhabited by horse-like aquatic mammals. Like Otkavongo Fangowitz before them, the Shalani are also fanatic egalitarians, with the main difference being their approach to war. The Fangowitz were peaceful, but Shalani society is actually permanently militarized. So much in fact that you have to enter the military to be able to vote, and that combination makes these horse-like aliens a bit jingoistic, since they seem to believe in spreading democracy by any means possible, even if it means bringing it by force of arms. So, good thing we are democratic as well. Also, it turns out that Shalani have already met the Zrakon Union before, and as you might expect, they were not impressed. Granted, the Union appears to be an oligarchy, which in Shalani eyes isn't as bad as an outright dictatorship, but still their relations seem to be rather bad. Perhaps with a bit of skillful diplomacy, we might convince the coalition to help us against the Union, and even if they won't, then at least we can offer them the same deal as our other friends, technology for resources, so in a way they will help us regardless of their choice. And, as it turns out, we now might need Coalition's help more than ever. In September 2028, the Alir ambassador approached us and officially declared that our defensive pact is no longer in effect. Our government was completely shocked by that declaration and demanded an explanation, and as it turned out, the Alir, our first alien contact and our first allies, decided to commit to another alliance, a federation between them and Sandrithan League. Unlike our defensive pact, this federation is a step further. Basically, these two nations will work closely together to achieve their combined goals, and they will even unite their fleets in order to defend their interests. We asked them if perhaps we could join them in this federation, but sadly they decided that our presence will be too destabilizing. Their alliance has been declared for mutual protection, not offensive actions, and with our recent posturing, both Sandrithans and the Alir came to conclusion that we're simply too much of a wildcard, and our actions could plunge them into an unwanted conflict. They will offer us an association status, which is basically a non-aggression pact with all members of their alliance, but aside from that we are on our own. If we are attacked, they won't come to our help like they declared just a few years ago. Fortunately, we managed to find another defensive partners in form of Shalani Coalition, but their power is nowhere close to combined fleets of Alir and Sandrithans. So, another nail of the coffin of our optimism, but at the very least we are still in good relations with the Federation, but we will not forget. At the very least, the dissolving of our pact made us even more determined in our push for new territory, and we are currently going to build yet another outpost, this time near Shalani space. And also, our outpost at Myrinius has just finished construction, and not only is it a political emplacement, it's also a respectable military base in its own right, sporting a nice battery of weapons, including an experimental siphon beam. Basically, it's a derivative of that disruptor cannon mounted on CSV Dark Wanderer, and it's extremely good at overloading deflector shields, although the actual damage output is wildly inconsistent, meaning that this weapon will probably never see much actual use. Still, that's not the point. Thanks to this outpost, we managed to reclaim the Bera system with its wondrous ocean world. The Fulos system still remains in Yadran's sphere of influence, but it's a good first step nonetheless. We just have to push a little more. And what could be better for that pushing than a mighty warship? Thanks to constant efforts of our engineering division, we can now design new class of ships, cruisers, a new class of vessel that, if our military theorists are correct, may one day become the primary ship of the line for our civilization. Now, we can't really build them just yet though, as we once again need to retrofit our dockyards to be able to build such large warships, but at the very least we can send our naval engineers to the drawing board and order them to design a cruiser that will soon act as a flagship for our fleet. And so, the Lempicki-class cruiser has been developed, and it is going to replace the Zhrinsky destroyer, which, mind you, we still haven't produced, as an artillery vessel, simply because we can install larger weapons on it. So, the two main features of Lempicki-class cruiser will be two massive turrets, one a mass driver, basically a conventional cannon that fires solid rounds at the enemy only with greater speed, and one laser beam that, unlike lasers on our corvettes, will be powerful enough to cut ships in half because we can install far more powerful reactor to fuel it. And to top it off, we're going to install 2 fusion missile launchers, although once again these ones will be able to deliver larger payloads than our previous models. Add to that a ton of armor plating, a few shield generators and our psionic engines, and we get an efficient long-range killing machine. Now, some of our officers claim that it's dangerous to rely solely on large weapons, since as we know they are less accurate, but that's what corvettes are for. They will keep smaller enemy vessels away from our cruisers, allowing them to fire at priority targets. And speaking of that, our destroyers have been replaced as artillery ships even before we build them, so now we're going to change their role to regular line ship maneuvers, get in range and fire broadsides. Not the most sophisticated tactics, true, but our corvette crews will surely enjoy additional firepower. Now though, there's still one thing we could do to aid our militarization. Ever since specialization of Arvo turned out to be a huge success, our government started to wonder just in what other ways we could specialize our other planets in order to increase our overall efficiency. One of the ideas they came up with was to designate one of our colonies as a forge world, basically a massive manufacturing plant that would produce everything our nation needs: consumer goods, prefab buildings, and of course weapons. The only question was which world should become our forge. Arvo was already designated for mining, Redum and Prime developed along the more cultured path given the presence of Asian Pyramid, and Ortus was our home, so the only option left was Curaçao, which is actually a perfect fit. Not only the natural features of this world will benefit our manufacturers, the planet itself is also in a good safe spot, far away from potential front lines and enemies that could disrupt our production. Granted, such specialization will cause other businesses to suffer, but they can always relocate to other worlds, and in their place various manufacturing companies will arrive, including the Elmarinen Foundation, that over the next few years will turn Curaçao into the workshop of humanity, where humans and Kithri will walk side by side to ensure our prosperity. But as we know, this prosperity will need to be protected, so in July 2029, OCN formally began a recruiting campaign for land armed forces. We already had several garrisons around, but this time we're going to prepare actual, fully operational armies that will not only be able to defend our worlds, but also, if need be, travel between planets and conduct offensive operations on hostile worlds. That will of course require a lot of logistical preparation. We need transport ships, supplies and exosuits to allow our soldiers to operate in hostile climates, but as was mentioned, it's nowhere near the costs required for our fleet. So, the recruiting campaign has been approved, and the plan is to train 3 1 million armies on every single one of our worlds. So, over the next year we're going to train 12 million soldiers, but only half of them will be human. The other half will be Kithri, who eagerly march to recruitment offices, hoping to prove themselves as our equals. They don't really have to do this, they have the same rights as our human citizens, but then again it seems they keep thinking they owe us for their uplift. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but if they really wish to volunteer for armies, we're not going to stop them. And in the meantime, the Alir gave our address to yet another alien civilization, the Yuri Galactic Commonwealth. And in spirit of all dictatorships everywhere, that Commonwealth in their name is just an empty word, because the UGC is actually a military oligarchy, which, to add to its charm, is also rather not fond of alien life forms. But the weirdest thing about this nation are creatures that inhabit it. The Yuri are some sort of floating, jellyfish-like beings that look just completely and utterly bizarre to our people, a fact that will surely not improve our relations. Still, they are relatively far away from us, so we're just going to ignore them for now. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, our very first cruiser, CSV Thor, has been constructed by joint human-Kithri efforts in the shipyard above Curaçao. For now, it only has a skeleton crew, but as soon as it joins with Admiral Lin's Task Force Manticore, she's going to claim Thor as her flagship, and bring the most skilled marines and crewmen with her. And she's going to need quite a lot of them, since this half-kilometer ship needs almost 600 men to perform with optimal efficiency. And no wonder, if you look at the numbers, you'll realize that this single single ship presents a quarter of the firepower of our entire fleet, as its massive guns are able to tear their targets apart with just a few minutes of concentrated fire. Unfortunately, building this kind of vessel is extremely expensive, so for now we're just going to deploy one of them and focus on destroyers for a bit, but in time, ships like CSV Thor will surely become the mainstay of our fleet. With such a powerful flagship at our disposal, our people will surely feel safer now. Now, perhaps you remember Rammas 2. It was the first planet outside of our solar system that we have landed on, and for a while it appeared to be our first potential colony, until we actually landed on the surface, that is. Back then, in 2203, Commander Shenku and his crew learned a painful lesson about Rammas 2 native inhabitants, swarms of huge, venomous and hostile arachnids that roamed the mountains and valleys of this Antarctic world. Afterwards, Rammas 2 has been designated as off-limits, but its presence taunted our government and our researchers, who were unwilling to ignore a promising world so close to our home. So, an idea was proposed. We already began researching practical ways of terraforming some time ago, and with recent advances we were able to manipulate the atmosphere of various worlds without the need to land on them. Thing is, atmosphere on Rammas 2 was already good enough for humans, so there was no need to change it too much. So, Professor Tanwar and her team devised a way to do only a minor alteration. Basically, they introduced a specially engineered bacteria that can only interact with the arachnids on the surface, and the effect of that interaction is beyond amazing. It doesn't kill the spiders, it just renders them docile, which means that our explorers and pioneers can land on the surface of Rammas 2 without getting immediately torn to shreds. Granted, most people will still have some reservations about living in a place constantly surrounded by huge arachnids, and as such the planet will not be as habitable as we hoped it would be, but at the very least we can now consider this world as a potential target for next colony. And, to make it even more important for our future mission to help the Aramathi, we can now tame the spiders and use them in our armed forces. I don't envy our future enemies once they realize that, aside from our regular troops, they will also have to fight battalions of spider-riding space hussars. Though, to be honest, I also don't see our men fighting side by side with these monstrosities. Well, all in due time. And speaking of colonies, we now have another one, very close to the borders of Shalani Coalition. It was placed on an Antarctic planet of Moros in the Uchblea system, though I will just call this system Moros as well, because it's easier to pronounce. Anyway, this world is relatively similar to Ortus, so both humans and the Kithri will be able to thrive there, but still there are some differences. First one is the presence of hot geysers that dot the entire surface of the planet, giving us easy access to both water and tons of geothermal energy. And second difference is natural wildlife. We already have our frost buffaloes on Ortus, but Moros appears to be home to absolute tons of wandering grazers, meaning that we will have quite a lot to study and even more to eat. But regardless of the planetary qualities themselves, this colony has one more task to perform. It will act as the extension of our borders, since, slowly but surely, OCN is getting boxed in. We have not flight towards the stars to end up locked up in a small neighborhood, so Moros will be our stepping stone towards the edges of the galaxy, as soon as we get enough resources to outfit more expeditions, that is. Soon, another decade has ended, and once more it was time for elections, but as you might probably expect, it was Chancellor Tessa who won by a landslide once again, claiming that now, at the eve of potential war, OCN needs stable leadership more than anything else. And the people approved, no wonder, since for most of them, especially younger generation, Tessa is a man who transformed OCN from a set of fragmented states into a united interstellar nation. Some question his seemingly unending stream of flawless victories as suspicious, but overall the masses seem to rally behind our Chancellor, and one of those who lately joined the Innovation Party was one Marek Branicki, a high-ranking officer from Ortus Military Academy. Following his amazing test results, he was officially appointed as a general of our armed forces, but as soon as he took the position, something has changed in him, and our new general quickly gained a reputation for being stubborn. Add to that the fact that he is a glory seeker, and he suddenly starts to look like a certain character from history books. It seems that bull-headed glory hounds just naturally gravitate towards our armies. But still, Branicki's results speak for themselves, and since we are a meritocracy, they are the only thing that matter. One of the first acts of General Braniski was creation of Mechanized Corps, a specialized army group that will use combat mechs, developed by Nestor Lachinov and Ilmarinen Foundation. Unfortunately, there were some issues. Initially, the plan was to build the production line for these mechs on Curacao, since that's where Ilmarinen HQ is located, but unfortunately we ran into a logistical issue. One of the things those mechs needed were actinides, highly radioactive materials used in construction of power cores for these mechs. But there were no actinides on Curacao, and transporting them from Ortus was out of the question, since they were way too volatile. So, the only thing we could do was to actually build those mech factories on Ortus. It would require a bit of industrial reshuffling. We'll be forced to re-specialize one of our mines, and tear down our aerofighter base to make space for the factory, but the end results will surely be worth it. And interestingly, some people actually claim that this was all an Innovation Party's plot to ensure these mechs will be manufactured at home, where they could be monitored instead on a distant colony. Ilmarinen is going to be unhappy about that decision, but to extend an olive branch, Ocean government gave them a contract for those aerofighter bases we had to dismantle, so it's better for them than nothing. But in the meantime, our civilization continued to grow, mature and adapt to life among the stars. With our population still eagerly supporting our colonization efforts, we have now seen the official completion of the Expanse branch of our interstellar Expanse project. All our future colonies will grow far more efficiently from this point, but aside from that, completion of this branch freed up a ton of resources, which can now be allocated to other projects. When something like that happened previously, back when we established Discovery branch, our government allocated even more funds to our scientific efforts and proclaimed the act of technological ascendancy. But those were better, more innocent times. Today we face a different galaxy than back then, and our borders are contested by potential enemies. So, to offset that, the government of Ocean decided to commit to our military efforts. First option is to lead the Phalanx protocol to its logical conclusion and allocate more resources into defensive stations, turning our nation into an impenetrable fortress that our foes will break their teeth upon, and once they are broken by our defenses, we will be able to leave our forts and bring the fight to them. Second option is to adopt the strategy of lightning war, developed in 20th century by imperial generals, during one of the greatest conflicts between British Empire and Eastern Commonwealth. Like those generals, we would turn our army into a fast-moving machine for precision strikes, allowing us to exploit enemy weaknesses and avoid them where we can't contest them. Third option is simpler. Give full support to the Navy, establish a board of quality control, and ensure our ships are always in top shape. It won't have such a drastic effect as two previous doctrines, but it will surely increase our overall strength, and perhaps more importantly, survivability. Or, eventually, the government itself proposed another solution. I mentioned the Lightning War. Back on Old Earth, this strategy almost destroyed Commonwealth, but it was countered in one of the more terrifying ways possible, by introduction of Industrial War. For every tank and every plane British Empire sent to the front, Commonwealth would send 10. However, without proper tactics, the losses were extreme, but finally the might of Eastern industry managed to stop the tide of British tanks merely 100 kilometers from Warsaw. Still, it was not over. The war turned into a bloody stalemate, which ended with millions of casualties and capital cities of both superpowers reduced to dust by atomic fire. And we could adopt the same strategy of industrial war today, but let's face it, it's better to hope that we'll never be forced to. In the end, when the votes were counted, option number 1 won, followed closely by option number 3. So, the Phalanx protocol will be expanded, and soon the galaxy will learn to respect our fortifications. The course has been set. It was time to return to work. And here are the results of this work. A Merit-class fortress, a space station designed specifically for defensive purposes. It is a massive orbital emplacement, bristling with all kinds of weapons designed to be effective against all kinds of ships, while at the same time the repair drones aboard the station will be able to ensure that our other ships, and the fortress itself, will remain operational regardless of enemy firepower. But although the weapons and defenses are certainly impressive, the key feature of this station is an unassuming computer relay attached to an extremely powerful reactor. That relay is a warp inhibitor, a snare that will ensure that whenever hostile ships enter the system, they will always land within firing range of the fortress. Not only that, but once they fall into this trap, the inhibitor will overload their drive cores and vent them right through enemy engines, which will both reduce their speed and prevent them from escaping. And the best part? Because we re-specialized our factories to mass-produce components for building such installations, this fortress will cost only a bit more than a cruiser, while having far more firepower. It won't be able to aid us in offensive operations, true, but as a fortification and security measure it is second to none. Our engineers outdid themselves back there.
System survey concluded.
And for their amazing work, they have been rewarded by the galaxy itself, as our explorers from CSV Tesla have found yet another wonder out there, one that will surely make all our engineers and physicists drop everything they are currently doing and go for a pilgrimage. For what we have found is no more, no less, but a star made entirely out of antimatter, something that, for all intents and purposes, should not be possible. This star, called Pila by our explorers, is not only extremely improbable, which paradoxically makes it all the more probable, at least according to a certain guide, but also very violent, as evident by the only planet in the system that has been literally torn apart by antimatter blasts. This system is going to be an amazing trove of wisdom for our research teams, but as it stands, it's going to teach us one lesson we probably don't want to hear, one of mindless, unstoppable violence.
Construction project complete.
You ask me if I met the Billy ones, liar. Yes, I have encountered them once, and I do not intend to repeat that mistake. You know full well that few months ago we received news about a mysterious ship that appeared above the planet and unleashed hundreds of thousands of these beings on the surface. Our Count, may Mother bless him, ordered to rally his levies, including me, and deployed us to the area. We marched with our banners high, hoping to greet those visitors, but instead we found only silence. There were several outposts and a town in the area, but they were empty, no Billy ones or Carthemas in sight. The towns were ruined, and there were signs of violence everywhere, but we haven't found any remnants of the fight. No bodies, no blood, not even a single scrap of biological material. That got our Count thinking, and he ordered us to check one of those outposts up close. Inside we found signs of battle and not a soul alive, but the oddest thing was the warehouse. By the decree of His Highness, every outpost must, at all times, have enough food and weapons to survive eventual attack for 3 weeks, the standard time of response of a unit of knights flying from the core. But while the food was gone to the last crumb, the weapons were still there, untouched. If an enemy race raided this outpost, then why didn't they take the guns with them, we wondered. Got our answers soon enough. They surrounded the outpost in broad daylight, rows upon rows of blue-skinned creatures, marching in unison in complete silence. In all my years, never have I seen such a thing. They were like armies in ancient tales, moving in formation and not even thinking about taking cover. They formed lines around my group, and for a moment we thought they wished to talk. But then, out of nowhere, without a single given order or even faintest sound, they attacked. Now, me and my banner, we have a lot of experience in hardships of wars, but not one of us was ready for the ferocity of this attack. What the hell, Kirish? Why did you pause? There is an inconsistency, Professor. This individual says he has experience in warfare, but the Yadra are a peaceful race, and their society had no bloody conflict in ages. It leads me to believe this video was fabricated. Good theory, Kirish, but unfortunately wrong. First, this went through Yadran most secure channels, reserved only for the king and his closest advisors. Took us weeks to crack the code. They wouldn't fabricate something like that just to screw with potential observers. Second, the Yadra may be peaceful, but from what we've gathered from our listening posts, their society seemed to be in constant state of what you would call a gentlemanly war. Basically, dukes, counts and knights of Yadra gather their levies, march to meet their enemies, and then engage in a lot of posturing and flag-waving, trying to outclass the enemy with tales of valor and honorable deeds. It's a dick-measuring contest, basically, but it keeps their upper classes busy without bloodshed. Now give me that remote. The Billy ones carried weapons. Crude, but once all is said and done, a kinetic projectile is deadly no matter what. Thing is, they weren't using them like we expected them to. Instead of moving with caution, they just lunged forward, firing a wild hail of suppressive fire. We responded in kind, and while our rounds did good damage, it didn't seem to dissuade them in any way. Every foe we struck fell to the ground, as silent as they were when still standing, and if our shots weren't deadly, they kept crawling towards us, as if immune to wounds. Worse, they did nothing to help their wounded, often trampling them in their mad rush.
The dead, though, were a different story. I didn't believe it at first, but whenever one of the creatures died, its nearby allies would just tear it apart and eat their body until there was nothing left. Suddenly, those empty towns made sense. Seconds later, they were upon me and my banner, and though we fought valiantly, we could not stem the tide. Tell me, liar, how do you fight a foe who doesn't feel fear or pain? How do you defend yourself against an enemy who doesn't consider you an opponent but food? We did our best, and the Billy ones paid dearly for my banner, but in the end they just swarmed us and tore us apart. By the time my count reached us, there were only a handful of us left. Still, though, it was not the end. We thought arrival of our armored column would force the enemy to flee, but they kept pushing, kept swarming, feasting on fallen from both sides to regain their vigor. We had to kill every last one of them, and when we saw yet another horde marching towards us, we turned to flee. These creatures, they may look civilized, they may carry weapons and wear clothes, but they are rabid animals, liar. Animals led by something we do not understand. All that I just told you, their ferocity, their cannibalism, is not the end. The worst thing are their whispers. They all whisper, all the time, the same endless mind-numbing chant, stopping only when they eat or die. You can't intimidate them, you can't rout them, you can't even outsmart them. If you flank and ambush one, the others know. We thought our society is united, but this is beyond anything we could expect. Whatever mind is behind Billy One actions, we are not ready to face it, liar. I know I strayed from the path of service by deserting my count, and I know my life is forfeit, but I do not care. If my sacrifice can convince you to warn the king, then it is worthy. Kingdom of Yadra must prepare, or the Billy Ones won't even leave our bones as a warning.
So, as it turns out, we have met yet another civilization, except, well, I don't think we can officially call them that. This entity that calls itself the Billy One Mind is apparently some sort of organic gestalt consciousness that seem to be encompassing every single individual of the humanoid race. Now, we have seen similar things before, mostly among various insects, but never on such a scale. Commander Kuo and his crew, who were the first to encounter these mysterious aliens, were able to establish contact, but even though we translated Billy One language, their messages were so cryptic, so incomprehensible, that they haven't really answered any of our questions. The working theory, for now at least, is that Billy Ones are connected into some form of a hive mind, and the individuals we have encountered so far are nothing more but mere drones that present no visible individual characteristics. And the worst part? From what we managed to understand, it appears that despite mastering technologies that enable it to travel through space, this hive mind still operates mostly on the most basic instincts: consume and expand, and according to our long-range scans, the Yadra are currently on the receiving end of their expansion. When the government learned about this revelation, a special secret meeting was called, and the mind was officially designated as the most dangerous of alien races we have encountered so far. And for the first time since we took to the stars, we're going to keep this discovery hidden from the majority of the population. This is something big, something that can potentially be more dangerous than Yanari and Zraken combined, and as a result, in a small bunker underneath our capital, the clock is moved even closer to midnight. But regardless, the expansion continues. The colony on Moros has been established without an issue, and more of our citizens began migrating there in order to carve a better life for themselves. And with them went the very first prototypes of a new type of mechanical walkers, droids, a far more advanced version of the robots we currently use. The experience in both mechanical engineering gathered from extensive use of previous models and various exosuits, together with advances in programming, allowed our engineer divisions to design these droids in a way that makes them far more useful than regular robots. They can now understand more complex instructions and as a result perform more complicated tasks. Previously they were only useful for simple industrial operations, manufacturing, extraction, things like that. But now they can not only be better at those tasks, but they can also help us in farming and energy generation, and that basically makes them perfect, untiring laborers. But that's not the end of story. With proper programming, these droids can also act as soldiers, and unlike squishy organics, droid armies won't really care about casualties or morale. That information immediately got attention of our land officers, who designed a theoretical army composition, a terror-inducing spiders from Ramas 2 combined with droids that cannot be scared or intimidated. And according to the reports from the press, when they brought this idea to Chancellor Tezar and Prime Minister Ishii, their eyes just glowed with excitement. We now have even more reasons to colonize Ramas 2 as fast as possible. Still, it seems that the galaxy is more crowded than we expected, as we are once again contacted by a previously unknown empire, the Shizri Council. And once again, the message is short and straight to the point. "We greet you, humans," said the Shizri message, "but since we don't want anything to do with filthy Xenos, we hope this greeting will be the first and last of our encounters. Shizri Council out." And that was it. No threats, no insults, just a quick "stay in your space and we'll stay in ours" kind of message. So, our by now completely jaded and preoccupied government responded in similarly short fashion, and that was it. We have far too many issues on our hands right now to bother with them. If they intend to sit behind their walls and cultivate their inward perfection in peace, then so be it. At least we shouldn't have to worry that they might attack us out of nowhere. But there was something else. According to the operators of our Comma race, the Shizri are located relatively far away from our borders, and to send us this signal they had to, in all probabilities, use some sort of amplifier. Question was, what was it? And as our operators began to dig, they found out another signal embedded in Shizri message. It was faint, and it was so far impossible to decipher, but it hinted at the presence of another transmitter that was used along the way. Using this data, we pointed our long-range sensors at that sector of space, and as it turned out, we picked up more of those signals. There is still someone out there, possibly yet another nation, but so far they remain a mystery. But given the local neighborhood, ravenous hives, xenophobic isolationists and evangelizing zealots, I'm willing to bet this new contact isn't worth pursuing. What is worth pursuing, however, is preparation for our military intervention. CSV Developer began construction of our Merit-class fortress near planet Arvo, since it's both the most exposed and valuable one, while in the Nigel system, which is the system closest to the Zrakan border, our second constructor, CSV Effort, is now finishing building our first Hanover-class defense platform. It is basically a small starbase with about the same amount of firepower as a cruiser, but just like our mighty fortress, it is equipped with a warp snare that will force the enemies to come to us. Now, the reason we built this platform here is this. Nigel houses one of our wormhole stations, the one that we need in order to enter Zrakan territory. If we lose the station and the system, then we will effectively be defeated, since we won't have an option to conduct any offensive operations. So, the government and the Navy decided to fortify this system to ensure that once we're ready to attack, the way will remain open. Also, this platform is located very close to the wormhole generator, which will enable our fleet to respond with far greater speed in case of enemy attack, since they won't have to spend days traversing the system to the site of battle. But still, a single platform may not be enough, so in order to ensure the safety of Nigel Gateway, our engineers have devised a second type of fortification, a Berlin-class platform. It is basically the same as the Hanover, with one difference. Instead of housing a warp inhibitor, the entire station has been calibrated to act as a single huge navigation beacon that will automatically link up with the ships moving through the system and aid their navigation calculations, which will greatly increase their sublight speed. It will even improve the efficiency of our wormhole gates, decreasing the amount of time we'll have to wait for our fleet's response. Now, some of the more offensively minded officers still believe that building static defenses is a waste of time, but now we are committed, so there's no going back. Might as well use those stations to their full potential. And the time for intervention is almost upon us. With the colony of Ramas Prime established in early 2233, our government officially finished last of its current civilian projects, and is now ready to fully commit to the war effort. And, by the way, Ramas Prime is considered a work-in-progress name. The colonists are encouraged to think of a new one, and as soon as the colony is self-sufficient, the voting for a new name will be held. Still, what better way to ensure we're ready for the conflict than by unveiling our freshly finished fortress? in first days of February, our government officially presented Arvo Merit Station to the public, and as you can see, it is an absolute monstrosity, sporting about 20 times more firepower than our entire fleet. It may not be able to move, sure, but one thing is certain: if an enemy decides to invade our solar system, this fortress will vaporize them within seconds. Its shields can deflect almost every attack, its armor can survive all but the strongest hits. Overall, this 9x4-kilometer citadel, crewed by 7,000 soldiers and another 5,000 support personnel, is the single greatest human-made object, and a marvel of engineering as well as proof of OCN's ingenuity. But it is not just that, it is also our anchor, a solid point we can use as a staging ground for all our operations. It projects our force, and at the same time ensures our safety, by sending a clear message to all would-be conquerors. You may try to attack us, this base says, but you will not survive the attempt. So, this is it. With Merit Station acting like a center of our battle line and a rallying point for our armed forces, the government of OCN made its final decision. In early April 2233, 5 years after encountering the enslaved Aramathi, the decision to send out an intervention force and free them from their oppressors have been approved. A decade ago, a situation like this would have been unthinkable, and yet here we are, at the brink of the greatest war humanity has ever witnessed. Not just a war between two countries or even two coalitions, but between two civilizations. On 8th of April 2233, data points and personal communicators alike all flicker to life and interrupt their regularly scheduled broadcast. Across all OCN space, every citizen, human and Kithri alike, see the face of their Chancellor. He takes a deep breath, even though the stars themselves seem to be holding it, and in a small bunker deep beneath our capital, the lone clock begins to strike midnight. Good evening, citizens of Ortus. First of all, I owe you an apology. For last 4 decades you have placed your trust in me, but it seems that in recent years all I bring you is more and more bad news, and today will be no different. My advisors have prepared an eloquent speech for the occasion, in which, in honeyed words, they offer countless explanations for what we're about to do. But I have decided to not use it, for, as history teaches us, it is a domain of tyrants to justify barbarous acts they commit, instead of facing their decisions. This is not the road that we intend to take. Instead, on behalf of an entire innovation party, I wish to show you respect by telling nothing more but blunt truth. In recent years, many of you have doubtlessly noticed a build-up of our military forces. Armies began recruiting volunteers en masse, fleet was expanded with new ships, and of course all of you witnessed the unveiling of Arvo Merit Citadel, a massive space station that will serve as a defensive bastion for our frontier colony. Many of you must have asked yourselves, why? Why all that militarization? Why all that posturing? What could possibly be the reason for turning our entire industry into an assembly line for defensive fortifications? After all, we are a peaceful nation, a nation that left wars behind on old homeworld and entered a new era of peace and prosperity, or so we hoped. With our peace came optimism. When we took to the stars, we believed our greatest dangers, starvation, sickness, or extinction events, became things of the past. But while those dangers were negated, others reared their heads in the void, awaiting our arrival. When we encountered the Alir, we hoped that the galaxy would be a civilized place, a place where human, Kithri or Alir or any other species could live together and cooperate in peace. For a few years, that dream pushed us to even greater discoveries, until we realized that we were wrong. First, there came the Yanari, whose society turned out to be so barbaric and repulsive that not even the most enthusiastic optimists were able to justify their actions. A race built on slavery and oppression, the Yanari were a wake-up call we needed to regain our logical mindset. Then, the kingdom of Yadra appeared on the horizon, calling us monsters and denying us access to galactic resources. And finally, the Zrakan Union unveiled itself, an oligarchy of fanatical zealots whose sole purpose in life is to crush individuality and freedom of other species and turn them into their willing tools. And the worst part? It already happened. As you learned in recent years, the Zrakan are not against using military might to enforce their will, and the Aramathi from New Sajar are the best example. Imagine, for a moment, the fate of those conquered by the Zrakan. Imagine losing all your rights, your belongings, even your ability to think independently. Imagine becoming a subservient slave to those who conquered your world, razed your home and slaughtered your friends. All that is left is endless toil in service of those who consider you a piece of filth, simply because you were born under a different sun. And as you walk in fields and factories and mines each day, you slowly realize that despite all the work you do, and every day you survive this slavery, your situation becomes even worse, for your work serves not you, but those who wish to destroy you. And now, picture the same thing happening to your family and friends. It is a fate I do not wish upon the worst of our foes, let alone our allies like the Aramathi. And because of that, we, the entirety of our nation, must act, not only to save the Aramathi from their cruel fate, but to prevent ourselves from becoming the next prey of Zrakan Crusade. In recent years, we worked hard to ensure the safety of our borders and our people, but the truth is that our defenses are merely a first step on the violent road we must take. If our history taught us anything, it is that religious wars were the most violent ones in history of old Earth, and we have no reason to believe it will be different today. Keeping Zrakan at bay will not work forever. What we must do, not just for us, but for the entire free galaxy, is to ensure that the Union will never be able to enslave and destroy lives ever again, by any means necessary. And with that, my fellow citizens, I declare that as of today, Ortus Council of Nations is at war with Zrakan Union. Our defensive stations will keep the enemy away from our worlds, but our main goal is to save the Aramathi people from life of slavery, and in doing so, diminish Union's ability to wage war ever again, and push them back where they came from. From this day until our victory, each citizen is expected to support our armed forces in every possible way, to ensure we present a united front against those who wish to turn us into their puppets. It is not a decision that was made lightly, my fellow citizens, but know that we will all do our best to ensure your safety and our victory. Peraspera ad astra, may we all prosper among the stars, no matter what it takes.